We have today Jean-Michel Oughourlian, who co-wrote the book Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World with Professor Girard. And let me start off by asking you, how did you first hear about Professor Girard?
Well, we have to go back to 1972. In the spring of 1972, I was trying to finish the writing of my thesis of doctor in psychology. I was already a doctor in medicine and so on, but I wanted to have a doctor in psychology. And I had my subject was the recent developments of drug addiction after the summer love in San Francisco in '69. And all my observations and reflections led me to think that the problem was violence. And I went to my librarian friend and I said to him, "You have to find me a book about violence." He said, "Okay, I have none for the time being in mind, but I will look for it." And in September of 1972, the doorbell rings, and here is the librarian handing me The Violence and the Sacred in French, which has just come out. And he said, "This is probably what you're looking for. Read it immediately." So I read it once. I was so enthused that I read it twice. I read it 3 times. I read it 4 times. And in the beginning of 1973, I decided that I had to meet René because I was convinced that his thought, his new approach, were going to transform totally psychology, psychiatry, and psychotherapy. So I took the plane because I had read that he was a professor in New York University. So I took the plane and I went to New York. It's amusing, since our common origin, that you should know that, of course, in New York, my contact was a very old friend, Mr. Karnik Malikian. And he was a very important businessman and so on. So he took me to his office and he said, "What can we do for you?" I said, "Well, I'm looking for Professor Girard." He said, "You know, at the time in 1973, there was no computer, there was no iPhone, there was nothing." So he said, "My secretary is very intelligent, she's very good, we're going to ask her to do it." So the secretary comes in and he says, "This is the problem." She says, "Okay, give me an hour, I'll try to find out where he is." And an hour later, she comes and she says, "Well, you know, I think there is a little misunderstanding. Professor Girard is indeed professor at the University of New York, but he is a professor at the University of New York in Buffalo." So I said, "Fine, how do I go to Buffalo?" She said, "You can't, because in February, there's 3 meters of snow, there's no planes going there, there's no trains, you can't go." So I said, "Okay, can I at least talk to Professor Girard on the phone now that I've come all the way?" She said, "Well, I will try." Comes back and she says, "Well, I was able to talk to the university, Professor Girard," and he says, and I explained to him the reasons why I thought that his thinking and his theory were going to revolutionize the psychiatry and psychology. He said, "Well, I can't really believe that, but anyway, we can work together." And indeed, a few weeks later, in July, I went to Buffalo.
Well, let me pause you before you do explain. Why did you think Violence and the Sacred would revolutionize psychiatry?
It was because I thought that the mimetic theory was really the key to the understanding of psychology. And this is why when we started writing together Things Hidden, I insisted having this third part called interdividual psychology, In other words, to remove the individual and stress the relationship. And I said we must make a psychology of the relationship, because a man alone, a person alone, a human being alone does not exist. He exists only in his rapport to somebody else. And René fully agreed to that. He said, yes, I agree, so on. So at that time, of course, I had read the preceding, the work he had done before, you know, Mensonge romantique et vérité romanesque, in which he really develops that. And during 5 years, until 77, or 4 years, I went there with a recording machine. We talked, and I came back and I wrote down everything we had been discussing, and I had it typed and I sent it to him, and then he would correct it and send it back and forth, back and forth. And finally, in the summer of 1977, he had moved by that time to Baltimore. He was at Johns Hopkins. And we laughed because we suddenly realized that in 1966, he was in Johns Hopkins, and he had made this huge Congress, you know, with Lacan and all sorts of thinkers. And at the same time that he was in 1960, I was in Johns Hopkins Medical School, but I never heard of him, and of course he had never heard of me. So, you know, it's funny. So anyway, I went there with my family, with my wife and 2 children. We rented a house, and we stayed there for about 3 months. And during 3 months, René would come every morning, and he said, listen, everything we've been writing and back and forth, I have put everything on the side, and we are going to rewrite the whole thing. I've been rewriting the first part, the second part, and now we're going to write the third part. And of course, we read it again together. My role was, I think, the role of somebody. It is encouraging to have somebody younger, but passionately interested. I would probably sometimes ask stupid questions, but the questions were stimulating for him, and he had an immense capacity of indulgence and patience to explain and to discuss with me. Anyway, I pushed him, for instance, to write the second part about the Bible, because he said, no, you know, they're going to think I'm too Catholic and so on. So I said, no, you have to write it because it's a great, great piece of work. And then we started writing the third part, which is individual psychology, in which, of course, we tickled Freud, and we were writing chapter after chapter after chapter. And one day we came across Beyond the Pleasure Principle. It was around 10 p.m. or so, 9 p.m. And he said, do you have the book? I said, no. He looked in his library, he didn't have the book. So he said, but I know someone who can have the book. We went together, walking, to the house of, what's the name of the guy who had this fantastic library? It was books up to the floor, to the ceiling in a huge house. And he said, what do you want, René? And so on. He said, we want Beyond the Pleasure Principle. He said, at this time of the week, the night? He said, yes. So we were laughing, waiting. He went into his library, and finally he came with a book, Jenseits des Lustprinzips, in German. I said, but that doesn't help me because I don't speak German. René said, I'll take it. I manage in German. So we went back and we worked on this. He was translating it and so on. We discussed it. It was very funny. Anyway, finally, at the end of the summer, we had a manuscript of 900 pages. I came back to Paris and I went to Édition Grasset, and I said, and I met Françoise Verny, and she said, "Are you and René? You've become crazy. 900 pages of a dialogue, of talking." And you know, the first idea of René, because we had met first in Cheektowaga, you know, in the Sheraton of Cheektowaga, was to call the book Les Entretiens de Cheektowaga, you know, the seminars or the the conversations or the dialogues in Cheektowaga. Finally, he said, no, I think I found a real good title. So Françoise Verny says, listen, I put it on my desk, but I'm not sure I'm going to publish this. This is ridiculous to try and sell a book like that. A week later, she calls me and she says, come to my office immediately. And I go at Grasset, and she says, you know, your work, it's completely crazy. Mais c'est génial. It's absolutely Of course, I'm going to publish it right now. And it was a huge success. It was a huge success. Of course, this built up René's, you know, how should I say, personality and fame. And I was very happy. And since then, I've been working myself only on with one objective, taking René's mimetic theory as far as I can in psychology, psychiatry, and psychotherapy. And this was the subject of all my further, you know, subsequent books.
Why did you start with the anthropology section? How did that happen? The first book.
Because we started discussing anthropology because we wanted to clarify, again, all the subjects of violence and the sacred. Actually, the first book of of Things Hidden is actually the explanation or the development of violence and the sacred. Of course, in Violence and the Sacred, what had absolutely enchanted me and mesmerized me was the chapter about Oedipus, you know, because of course I thought, you know, but of course this is the real explanation. It's not Freud's thing. It's something completely different. The chapter about Oedipus, I thought was absolutely genius, absolutely genius. And so after that, I wrote this book in French called Un mime nommé Désir. And that was my big thesis. You know, in France here, there's a big thesis called Doctorat d'État ès lettres et sciences humaines. It takes many, many years. I had a bibliography of 2,000 pages. I have a 500 or 600 page text. And it takes 7 top-notch professors in the jury. And in the jury, René came from the States to be in the jury. The president of the jury was Michel Serres, our great friend.
Yeah.
Plus there was another 5 top-notch professors. And of course, I came out with flying colors. And Michel Serres had a very amusing word. He said, I'm going to say it in French and then we'll translate it in English.
Okay.
He said, croyez-moi, après 3000 ans, pour trouver quelque chose de nouveau à dire à propos de la Genèse et du paradis terrestre, il faut se lever matin. In other words, translation is, you know, after 3,000 years, if you find something new to say and comment about Genesis 3 and the story, the history of the paradise and paradise lost and so on, the sin of Eve, you really have to work hard and wake up early. Anyway, so I went on further, and after that, we continued, René and I, to, you know, to discuss, to talk on the phone. I went to the States, he came to Paris. I continued being inspired every time I spoke to him, and he was following my work. At one point, for instance, I wrote a book called Psychopolitics, And I asked him to write the preface. And he said, yes, I will. But I have written a book about anorexia nervosa, and I want you to write the preface to that. So I said, okay. So we each wrote the preface of the other. And so we were having a lovely time. Every time we were together, we were laughing, we were talking, we were having a wonderful time. And we were really close friends.
I can imagine.
We were discussing everything. I mean, we could talk about anything. And
how did the second book of Things Hidden come about? Because that was a very different book. How did that start? How did you manage to get René to talk about?
Well, because he showed me that part, and he said, "We're not going to put it in because I'm going to be accused of being too Catholic or too Christian." And of course, at that time, you know, in France, if you were not Marxist, atheist, and Freudian, you were to be rejected. You know, and I was myself. All my career in the Sorbonne and in the French University was very much jeopardized by my attitude and my Girardian inspiration. But I said to him, René, you have to put it in because it's absolutely fundamental. And if you don't put it in, you will not publish it independently.
So that was a dialogue you and René had actually done already on Judeo-Christianity, the second part.
No, he had written it entirely, but then we discussed it again.
I see.
And for instance, let me give you just one little piece of information. For instance, I tried to, you know, to push him to and so on. And in the end, I told him, listen, René, you know something? We could summarize the whole thing by saying that, I'll say it in French and then we'll try and translate it. La victime émissaire et la création des dieux païens, c'est on divinise une victime. You turn a victim into a god. And in the Passion of Christ, on victimise un Dieu. You victimize a God. In other words, it's the completely different. He said, no, we're not going to put this sentence because it's too theological, and and we're taking sides, and we are, you know, enforcing the idea that we really believe that Jesus was God, and we cannot say that because we will be lynched. Right. So I said, okay. So, you know, this kind of conversation went on, and then we went on to the third part. And then, of course, one day in 1995 or something like that, after, you know, many years of friendship and going back and forth, and he would read my books and I would read his books and so on and so forth, and comment. And he gives me a call and he says, we're making a gathering here in Stanford. You have to come immediately. And I said, what is it about? He said, do you realize that we're going to have here Vittorio Gallese, the number 2, the guy who in Parma discovered with Rizzolatti the mirror neurons. He said, do you know what that means? I said, no, I'd never heard of it. He said, well, come on, you come immediately. So I went, and we had this big meeting with Vittorio Gallese, Bob Hamilton Kelly, Jean-Pierre Dupuis, René Girard, and so on. And of course, I, at that time, had to make a speech about what I thought, about the new psychiatry I was trying to implement. But what the most interesting thing was Vittorio Gallese telling us that our brains are mirroring each other all the time. In other words, we had there the scientific proof that the mimetic theory had a neurophysiological basis, because we realized that, in fact, the constitution of the brains and the existence of mirror neurons explained the fact that desire was mimetic, and that everything that all our interpersonal relationship was of mimetic nature. And of course, there was the Andrew Meltzoff, who was this big psychologist from Seattle, who had published in late 1970s, all his works about babies, you know, being able to imitate before talking, before anything. So we were fascinated, extremely excited and everything. And I came back to Paris, and René came, and we had a big meeting in the American hospital. I organized a big conference about Vittorio Gallese came and so on. And we developed, you know, because now we had something very strong to rely upon, you know, because we had it's not a proof, of course, but it really indicates that there is something there in the mimetic theory. It's not just René's fantasy, you know. And that's fantastic, to be able in a lifetime to experience a theory, develop the theory completely out of the analysis of, you know, romantic or literary texts, the text of Cervantes, Shakespeare, Stendhal, Dostoevsky, Proust, and so on. And at the same time, in the same lifetime, be able to have the neurophysiological proof on the screen of the PET scan that would indicate that you were really not, you know, mistaken. And that's how I wrote the book, my next book, in French, called Notre Troisième Cerveau, which was beautifully translated by my friend Trevor Merrill in English, published by Michigan State University Press, called The Mimetic Brain. So because then I enforced the whole idea, and I really reshaped the whole nosology and semiology and construction of psychiatry and psychology based on that theory. And I've been working since, you know, as much as I can, but now I'm getting old. And I think I've just written maybe my last book called Alterity, which will come out in about 2 weeks here in France. And maybe will be translated sometime in the States. So that's the whole idea. And of course, every time I speak about René, I say, you know, I know René is dead, unfortunately, but I can't believe it. And I can't accept it. And I will always continue to be inspired by his thought and by his thinking, by his genius, because René was, in my opinion, a real genius. And what is a genius? A genius is someone who looks at something, some phenomenon, millions of people have been looking at without seeing what was to be seen. Like, for instance, Newton watched an apple falling from a tree, and it gave him the inspiration of the gravity. And I said, René, same thing. Everybody had read Cervantes and Shakespeare and Stendhal and Dostoevsky. No one ever realized that what they really were pointing at was that desire was mimetic, and that the object was always designated to the desire of the subject by the model. So this is why I said, you know, I said it in a public conference. René was present. And René said, no, no. I said, yes, René, you are a genius.
Yeah.
So my admiration for him was extremely great. And I really consider that since, I tell you, since 1972, he has influenced completely my practice of medicine, my practice of psychiatry, my thinking, my theory, everything. My view, my out view on psychology and psychiatry and psychotherapy, you know. So that's it. What else can I tell you?
No, in Cynthia Haven's book, she wrote that you were his best friend. Would you consider that true?
Well, I always thought he was my best friend. And Cynthia Haven says that he told her I was his best friend, and I'm extremely proud of that. I'm really very proud of that. And well, it's probably true because, you see, when we were together, we always laughed so much. I never laughed as much as during those 3 months during which we wrote Things Hidden. We were absolutely in stitches over everything. And he taught me how to read great texts without reverence, with interest. But he said, you have to find out what the text says, what the text means, and what the text hides, you know. And this is a lesson that kept in my mind. So from then on, I was able to read those texts without bending to those big figures like Freud and Jung and so on. And so, of course, we had jokes, you know, because one day I said to him, what do you think of, I don't know, which situation in psychology? And he said, I can't answer you. Give me a text. I'll analyze it. Give me a text. So I said, okay, well, I don't have a text, but anyway, we laughed and everything. A few weeks later, he asked me a question about, you know, the situation in psychology. And I laughed and I said, René, give me a patient. Well, you see, this was the kind of joke that we would
back and forth.
back and forth. We had a wonderful time. We had a wonderful time.
Let me ask you something, since you were a close friend of his and you're a psychiatrist, a man who wrote so much on violence and scapegoating all his life, how come he was so much full of joy?
Well, I tell you, it's very difficult to say because he felt that violence was the essence of civilization. You know, the first great Congress we had in '81 in Stanford was Disorder and Order. And the disorder was violence, undifferentiated violence. And order came out of that violent crisis. So, no, I think and also, you see, I think the lesson I drove was that if you are able to look at reality without judging it, just looking at reality as it is, as such, it gives you a great deal of comfort and joy. And I was amazed to see that the Dalai Lama says about the same thing. And Krishnamurti says about the same thing. And plenty of Indian philosophers and wise men say the same thing. And I have myself, of course, it has helped me to develop, you know, my inner psychology and to be able to cope with life.
Yeah.
Which wasn't easy. He had, on me, he had an influence of paramount importance. And another joke he had, when I visited one day in Stanford, you know, Sunday, he said, well, let's go to Mass. And on our way to Mass, he said, you know, when you visit other people, you know, in other places, in other countries, they take you to the nightclubs. I take you to Mass. You know, one thing he always stressed, he said, I haven't written everything I have written, and I haven't done this work because I was Christian. I became Christian because of my work that led me to a point where I could not be Christian. And Michel Serres said the same thing. He said, avec René, on n'a plus besoin de croire puisqu'on sait.
No.
You don't need to believe or to have faith since you know.
No.
That's all you need. You know?
Yeah. Did you also know René's family? Did you?
Oh, sure, of course.
Yeah.
We were very close to Martha, Marie, his daughter. When she was younger, she came here and stayed with us in Paris for a whole year. And I know his sons, Martin and Daniel, especially Daniel. We're very close to him. Unfortunately, we don't see much of them because now we're here, we're old. For me now at my age, it's quite an effort, you know, to fly 10 or 15 hours, you know.
I understand. That was René's concern as well when he was getting older.
Oh, yeah. At one point, you start getting very tired. Although I would like very much to go to the States because my daughter is a doctor in Miami, Florida.
I see.
And I would like very much to go and visit her, but I say to her, listen, why don't you come and visit me?
Well, Paris is better, of course.
Yes, and it's much less tiring for me.
What is your favorite book of René's? Do you have a favorite book of his?
Oh yeah, Violence is the Sacred.
Honestly, hands down.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because when I ask people, everybody says Des choses cachées. Des choses cachées wins. but you're one of the authors, so you can't really say that.
First of all, I can't. And second, Violence is the Sacred is the one that put me
on track.
On orbit.
On orbit, right. Do you think René was a mystic in any way?
How shall I say? He was a laughing mystic.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he wasn't the kind of mystic that's serious, boring, you know, and withdrawn. He was very outspoken, very funny, very witty, full of humor, and full of indulgence towards mankind.
Yeah.
In that respect, I think he was identifying to Christ.
Yeah.
He was identifying to Christ. You know, Christ was very sorry to see people sinning and so on, but he was at the same time forgiving.
What did you think of his last book? Battling to the End. Clausewitz, yeah.
Of course, Battling to the End, Monter aux Extrêmes and all that. René had spoken about that a million times, you know. Rivalry can go to the extremes, and we said together a million times that when rivalry gets exacerbated, the two rivals lose track of the object of their rivalry. And the rivalry becomes their obsession, and they couldn't care less anymore about the object that eventually triggered the rivalry. So, but of course, Achevé Clausewitz was okay. But it's not, I mean, for me, it's not inspiring as much as the other, especially not as much as Violence and Sacred or all the others. I mean,
no.
I see Satan falling like a lightning, so that's very good. But of course, most people, they concentrate on things hidden because it's a sort of an overview of all anthropology.
Most people think Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World changed them the most when they first read it. That's the book that
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
yeah.
Because indeed, you see, they have to, if they read it and they understand it, it revolutionizes everything they had been thinking before.
Yeah.
About the violence, about the sacred, about psychology, about mimetics, about the Passion of Christ, and everything.
So when you met René, was he a Christian? Was he a Catholic when you met René?
Yes, but not. He was, of course, Catholic, but he was not fanatically Catholic.
Right.
He became more mystic, as you would say, or how should I say, more hard Catholic,
Yeah.
if you like, towards the end. Towards the end, yes. Yeah.
But you contributed to that probably, didn't you?
Well, I don't know. He contributed to make me a Catholic, or I did. I don't know which. But you know, well, Cynthia Haven asked me the question. She said, "You're a Catholic and a Christian, at least, and how come?" I said, "Listen, there are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that 17 members of my family in Turkey have been, including my own grandfather, have been killed, massacred, because they were Christian." And I said, I cannot betray all these people. I have to maintain the tradition. And also, working with René, it's very hard not to be Christian.
Yeah.
And I've just had a 3-day meeting with the Father James Allison. He's a very good theologian.
Yeah.
What of course is extremely flattering for me is that he says that his anthropology of theology is based on my work. So of course, and of course on René's work, but I mean,
right.
Psychologically, it's more on my work that it is based. And so of course, I'm extremely proud of that.
Yeah, sure, of course. But
I like him as a person. He's good.
Yeah. You don't practice anymore, do you?
Well, no, you see, I'm 80 years old. I've retired from practicing for now 7 years. I stopped practicing at 73.
I see.
Not because I was demented or anything, but because the practice of medicine in France had become too, bureaucratic. With Social Security interfering with every prescription, with being controlled for everything, having to write endless reports in every direction.
Yeah.
That's not my way. I like to have a patient and concentrate on the patient and try to see how I can help him.
Yeah.
But if the patient's only view is to leave my office and go and see his lawyer to see how he can sue me,
yeah,
I'm not interested anymore.
Yeah.
In the office of a psychiatrist, there are 3 persons: the psychiatrist, the patient, and the disease, the neurosis or the psychosis. And the problem is to find out whether the patient wants to get allied to the neurosis to prove that the psychiatrist is an asshole, or to get allied with the psychiatrist to get rid of the neurosis.
Let me ask you one last question, Jean. Do you have any one particular good memory you have of René in all these years that you were with him?
I have so many. One of them I mentioned in my last book that's coming out next week. We were sitting, René, Martha, and myself, in a fish restaurant. It was a springtime in Paris, and we were enjoying a nice dinner. as usual. And I had been reading lots of Indian philosophers, you know, Krishnamurti and Ramana Maharshi and so on. And I said to René, I want to ask you a question. If you meditate and you look very, 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 very deeply inside yourself, what will you see? He said, you will see your mediator. In other words, your model. And that was the key issue that I developed in my book, The Alterity, because I said, actually, even if you go as deep as you want inside yourself, you see the other. You see alterity.
That's pretty scary, though.
It's scary if you're afraid of the other. It's not scary if you take it for what it is. What you have to be very careful, and that's the key to wisdom, is not to make the model a rival or an obstacle. To keep him as a model. If you do that, you're safe and you're in the path of wisdom. But if you turn the model into a rival, or even worse, into an obstacle, then you enter neurosis.
Wasn't René's solution to have Jesus be your model? Wasn't that the ultimate solution?
Yes, but the thing which I emphasized is that you shouldn't imitate Jesus, because if you imitate a model, you always have this risk of him turning into a rival or an obstacle. So what you have to do is follow Jesus, follow his steps, follow his teachings. Because if you follow somebody, you acknowledge that he precedes you, that his desire is before you, and therefore he can never be a rival. See?
Yeah.
So the problem is to follow Christ and follow his path and try to understand what he says and means, and that's what he was during his life. Christ would say to people, you know, he said, leave everything and follow me.
Yeah.
He never said mimic me. He never said come and make a miracle like I do. You know, he never said come and walk on the sea as I can do it. He never said that. But he said, leave everything and follow me.
But he did give the rules of the kingdom: turn the other cheek, walk the extra mile, all those things. He gave rules.
No, he gave not rules. He gave advice. He gave examples, models.
Models. Yeah, exactly.
You know, like the other cheek is, if this aspect of you is developing rivalry, maybe if you show the other aspect of you, maybe that'll lead you to comprehension and understanding, you know.
Right.
And that's the key issue of every diplomatic negotiation.
Right. Right.
So I think in every time he gives an example, and James Allison has a very, very good analysis of his parables. How do you say parables in English?
Parable.
Parables. Okay.
Yeah.
This is it. No, but René is really a great loss. But I mean, I can say that all my life has been shaped by René's thought. There's no question about that.
Thought and friendship, I guess.
Thought, friendship, relationship, everything.
Laughter.
Master,
everything. Well, you should write a book on him sometime.
Well, I did, and Benoit Chantre doesn't want to publish it because in the book we have a point that we disagree upon. I have found a letter written by me to my father saying I've just sent René 575 pages typed of our conversations. And then I said that when I went to Baltimore, René said, no, I have put everything aside and rewritten everything. And Benoit says, no, I cannot publish that because I haven't found in René's papers anything about that. So, okay. He doesn't want to publish it, fine.
But that's a book that you've written about René?
Excuse me?
It's a book you've written about René?
Yeah, it's a small book. Yes, I had written about him, about everything I've just been telling you, the way I met him and everything.
Well, why can't you find another publisher?
Because I don't want to enter in rivalry with Benoit Chantre, who is the president of...
Okay, very good.
Maybe I will leave the book to be published after my death, you know, sometime.
No. Well,
I won't be there.
yeah. Well, Cynthia Haven's book has documented it, and there has been also another book for René that has your essay in it, and this film is going to be out. So there's definitely going to be plenty of your contribution that's out there already. So,
have did you see the Lern, the Lern book, Lern?
Ern? No. Which one is that?
Lern is a very thick review that comes, you know, and every review, every production is dedicated to an author.
Uh-huh.
There's been coming, one has come out about René, in which I've written how I met him and everything, what I told you now. Lern, cahier de Lern, Apostrophe H-E-R-N-E.
Okay, very good.
Look at it. It's plenty of other texts interesting.
Okay, very good.
All about René, and there's René's picture on the cover.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking your time to have this conversation with me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you for being interested in what I said.
Absolutely, this has been wonderful, and I hope to see you soon. Come to
Paris.
Paris.
If you come to Paris, and I happen to be in Paris, I'd be delighted to see you. And you live in New York.
I live in New York, absolutely. And if you come to
New York,
I would love to see you as well.
But if you come to Paris, it's much more easy for me to see you in Paris.
Okay.
We'll have a nice meal.
Okay. Are you going to be in Paris from here on, or are you going to be traveling?
So, going back to Spain day after tomorrow. And after that, I might go to Lebanon, where I have some things to do. And I might go to Armenia. As you know, I am the ambassador of the Order of Malta to Armenia now for the past 10 years. So I have some work to do, but I couldn't go so far because of the coronavirus. Armenia was confined and borders were closed, and so I couldn't go. So I might be back to Paris, say, at the end of the year.
Okay.
But anyway, after that, I will be staying 3-4 months.
Okay.
Well, anyway, lovely talking to you and meeting you, and hoping to see you very soon.
Très bien. À bientôt.
Merci beaucoup. À bientôt. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.